All right, what is good, YouTube family? Hopefully, you guys are doing blessed. Today, we're going to be tapping into what we think can happen for the week, what happened last week, and pretty much go from there, right? So, firstly, we're going to go ahead and speak about dollar. Okay, so we spoke about a couple different things here, actually, with dollar, a couple different possibilities that we were looking at. One of the most interesting things of the week before, right, between obviously episode 26 and 27, was the massive sell-off that we had on dollar, right? So originally down here, daily time frame wise, 4 hour time frame wise, there was a nice buy opportunity to bring us up to there, right? And then, for those of you guys that are on live with us on stream, we recognized a couple of institutional candles that printed there at the top that ended up creating a huge down move on dollar, right? So now seeing how, we have this, really the question is now, obviously, like, are we going to continue, the accumulation that we have been creating now since the beginning of the year, right? We can see here the bottom here happened on the 26th of January, which is also Wyckoff Sundays episode 2. If you guys ever want to recheck us, re-see all the work that we've done so far, right? But yeah, ever since then, we've been talking about this accumulation. We've been talking about this goal for 102 to hit on dollar. But we still haven't quite reached there, right? We got very, very close on this last high, right? Very, very close, right? But now we've really had this push to the downside, which does still make sense, right? I mean, for me, obviously I think that we had our two tests down here, right? So we had two retests of the spring at this level. And, I don't think that this we can look at as the signs of strength because, we hadn't had an LPS yet, right? Typically with an LPS, we want to get back into the middle of the range, right? At least, or into the range, and then create that LPS in the middle of the range, right? This is the only one that I feel like we can really call our LPS, right? So since that's the case, we don't really have, signs of strength, I feel like, until we start to get to around here, right? So because of that reason, I do still think that, again, we do have the, one more bottom to be created. We have one more point of manipulation to happen before we really see dollar, head towards things like 102 and, maybe even 104, 103, stuff like that, right? So we'll see how that ends up going, but that's essentially still the premise that I want to work with at the moment, right? I'd rather go ahead and look for the longs back to the upside. So that's what I've been experimenting with, and that is what we spoke about on last week's Wyckoff Sunday as well, right? So we were talking about obviously the steep sell-off, right? We were talking about the weekly candle from the previous week, right? So that really went ahead and created this strong down move. Now, really, this candle, last week's candle did nothing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we can see barely really moved last week, to be real, right, compared to at least the week before, right? So, what we were kind of talking about, last week was a potential buy opportunity a little bit lower on dollar. So we were thinking we had some potential to hold this, take away some of these internal points of liquidity, right, before then starting to head to the upside, right? So I did end up taking longs on this position during New York session the next day, and we can see, obviously it did end up playing out really well, right? We had a good buy zone from the area that we had, right? Good institutional candle as well to confirm it. We took our trade in here, and we ended up getting a nice rally, a good risk to reward from that level, right? But, obviously once NFP hit, right? So we obviously want to make sure that we're always prepared for, again, big news events and are aware of when they're happening because, again, we can look at this one candle, right, from here to here, massive one, right, created by that NFP news event. So I think that really when it comes down to it for, that push to the downside, obviously extremely aggressive, right? And then after that aggressive move, I mean, we really did nothing, right? We kind of just held the lows and stuff. I ended up looking to take an attempt on this on Euro USD in here. So I am currently in a short on Euro USD in these levels, right? I did a type 3 setup on this. Did manage to take a little bit of partials here and then, leave the rest over the weekend to see what can happen. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Actually, no, I guess that is from last week, so we can talk about it now. But yeah, so, again, took longs in here, right? Took longs in here to try and attempt to see when are we going to get this dollar buy to really happen, right? Obviously, we got to stay patient with the sweeps because, again, like we even spoke about on the call, or on the video rather, you know, we could still have like, again, another sweep to the downside is obviously still a possibility, right? To go ahead and take that low, right? Maybe even get down into the more extreme areas here and stuff like that. So we'll see if like we'll talk about that possibility for this week, whether we're looking for it or not. Really, only time will tell, though, essentially. But yeah, so that was really the idea from last week. Can we get the buys back up on dollar? We did get a good reaction, right? And then NFP ended up driving below the lows. But that being said, I mean, again, we still have some good points of liquidity that are holding. Like we can see the big wick here, right? We can see that we did not break this high as well. So maybe we can look at that as well as a potential target, for the buys when we do get them. So I think that dollar really does still have its potential. But yeah, the buy opportunity that we did speak about last week did play out decently well. And then there was Euro USD. So we spoke about, obviously for this one, we wanted to see price hold one more time, I believe, above these areas. I don't think that we got that, right? So what we were looking for was like price to either hold here, right, sweep, and then head towards this liquidity, right, while holding this high, or, right, to again sweep that high and then end up, creating the push to the downside. So I believe for, recently after that happened, we can see that firstly, I mean, what's really good is that we do have these lows here that are still intact. If anything, we added to them when we came back down, right? But yeah, we did get another drive higher, right? But we do see that, with Euro USD, we did get price just barely reaching above that previous level, if I'm not mistaken here. Let me see here real quick. Let's see here. Yeah, it does look like we did take that high. Just barely, right? So barely took the high, sold off, right? Kind of went in line with this previous trend line that we had already drawn up, and then ended up continuing to the upside, right? So, with this, again, still thinking about the shorts, still looking for those to happen. But yeah, obviously just didn't play out the way that we wanted for EU. The one that did play out for us was GU. What we had spoken about with GU was the zone over here, these relatively equal highs that have been swept. So we wanted to see price basically get back into that area, hold this level, and then from there kind of give us the sell-off. And that was the opportunity that we took initially when DXY made this. Oh, whoops, my fault. We're gonna go back here. So yeah, here we go. All right, when DXY made this low here, right? We ended up, getting that push to the upside there. That was when we went and attempted this GU short from this level, right? So we had price essentially get back up, take internal points of liquidity, create institutional candles, and then when price came back into that level and started to react, that's when we took our opportunity, right? So we did want to see this get a little bit lower, 401 to 3, but unfortunately, we did end up just barely getting above that high after that, right? So we can see here that this is the NFP moment from right there. NFP brought this all the way up above that previous high. So again, it does look like NFP was taking liquidity out from a seller's perspective, right? Didn't really take any liquidity out, or it did take some liquidity out, like with this level, but it didn't really take too much liquidity out for the buyers. Levels like this are intact and stuff like that as well. So I am still thinking that we're on the right track with dollar. It's just about waiting for that full accumulation to play out. But yeah, we did manage to get that buy, that short there, I mean, on GU. AU, we didn't take an attempt on, but really the same idea applies across the board with these, right? The one that we did say, we could actually end up seeing was USD CHF, and we'll talk about that for this week actually, because it didn't end up happening. USD CAD also got into our zone down here, right? I didn't take this trade here, but yeah, so USD CAD got into this level here. So I do think that certain things are getting into good areas for it, right? So that was currencies, right? Not really too much there. The next thing that we spoke about was gold, which did end up getting a beautiful move. We spoke about the manipulation that happened inside of the previous lows on gold, and we did say that our most likely scenario was that these levels were going to hold and that we were probably going to start to head up, above our trend line, above the liquidity that was there. So we were looking for a target at about 42.50. I believe I said. Area where previously there was also some good manipulation that brought us higher, right? So it is starting to look like it's holding these levels pretty nicely. And then maybe after that, maybe if we end up sweeping one more time, right, get back up into imbalances like that, then we can go ahead and come lower and give us that final sweep that we had spoken about on previous Wyckoff Sundays. But it's tough to say, if that sweep down can even happen until we really see order flow break to the downside. Then that would really, change. So yeah, so basically, as you guys can see, what we had said was that because of the way that these lows were holding, the most likely scenario was that we were going to buy up, and then after that, wait to see if we can start to get a break in order flow to see if we can get the shorts back down again, right? So far, there has been no break. We did reach that imbalance, which was the target that we could potentially short from, but it does look like price ended up continuing even further with this so far, right? So gold for the longs, that we spoke about on Wyckoff Sundays did play out really nicely, and did push quite aggressively despite dollar not really doing too much this week. So we could see gold pumped about 6% after our call, right? And then same thing over here with silver that we spoke about, was that silver had a bit of a divergence compared to gold, right? Because we did see silver break this low, while gold ended up holding it during that same level, right? So we could see that right here. This is that same relative moment on gold that we can see obviously held these previous lows, whereas with silver we can see that we ended up breaking those previous lows, right? So the divergence there again really pointed towards the bullishness towards metals, because again, like, why do we need to clear up buyers like that for silver? Because we're about to get quite the move, right? And that's obviously what did end up happening. So we'll see if this coming week we can find the shorts or not, right? If we do end up getting those dollar buys, that could be the idea. We'll talk about that a bit later. Next thing we spoke about was NASDAQ. Obviously, we wanted to be long-term bullish, but we did say the only place that we're really going to be interested in is a lot deeper from where we are right now because we had such an intensive move. We still have to have that pullback to reach us back down. We can see that things like NASDAQ did end up obviously coming back a little bit, right? But not quite down towards the levels that we wanted. So again, nothing too crazy happening with NASDAQ. US 30, same idea. There wasn't really many zones except for all the way down there. And obviously we're not there yet, right? So this is quite a ways away from where we would obviously want to buy. Maybe we can see like this week what could happen a little higher if we reaccumulate or something like that. But as of right now, there's nothing there for us, right? And then same thing with S&P. We also just kind of marked up some higher time frame zones, but we're quite a ways away. So tough to say how this can really play out, but it looks more like we got to sit on our hands there, right? Now there's BTC, right? Really with BTC, the week before we had caught some beautiful shorts from these areas. And then we basically spoke about the fact that, now we're probably going to have to come a little bit higher if we were really going to sell off from this level again, right? Go ahead and clear up some of the sellers. I do still think that looks like what we're doing, right? We had a bit of a reaccumulation here. I do think that this will probably end up continuing higher, heading towards these areas over here, and kind of looking at, basically this high, this high, this high, and this high, all as liquidity, right? So maybe we can end up poking above there, right? Maybe still holding this level, tough to say, because again, it does kind of look like we may have had a reaccumulation here. But if there is opportunities for it, we'll see if we'll see if the price action's right in this area. But definitely approaching with caution. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. All right. So yeah, so that was last week really. Main plays that made sense were the dollar plays. But honestly, guys, like we said, dollar didn't really do much, right? We could see the weekly candle last week was quite a small one. Nothing crazy happened, right? Kind of ended up as a doji, so it really moved nowhere. Just kind of went to an extreme area at the top, went to extreme area at the bottom, and then closed bearish, right? So nothing too crazy to take away from last week. Honestly, quite a slow week, to be real, right? So these are the kind of weeks that obviously we want to be cautious and just make sure that we're using our proper risk management, because when price is consolidating like this, that's when we get stop hunts happening again and again and again, right? So anyways, guys, let's go ahead and talk about what we can see happening this coming week. So like I was saying in the beginning of this call, right, I do think that the BU/LPS, we're still waiting to see loading, right? From a daily time frame perspective, having this candle and then this candle next to it is really not a great sign for the buyers. Like I said, I did take an attempt on taking buys on this when we did have the NFP sweep, but I did already take partials on it because I do think that we might get another push to the downside to happen again, right? So really where I would love price to go to, because it does look like we're going to break order flow when it comes to this low here, is the previous, reaccumulation, which is right around here, right? So this is where I would love to see the BU/LPS really happen. We can see that this is where we had a distribution, lots of liquidity, and then a liquidity sweep there to begin our order flow, right? So I do think that if we hold this level here, it would make a lot of sense. We would definitely have a good bullish area to push from, right? That reaccumulation. So this is basically where I want to see price trade into. Sorry. So this is where I want to see price trade into, for that coming week, right? So only time will tell, really, in terms of how it goes, right? Like I said, I am willing to take attempts in areas like this and areas like that, where we can get setups at the right timing. But if we, if we're being real, obviously, it's I think it is looking more likely now that we have this push to the downside that we do get a drive lower, right? But personally, guys, I am still in my dollar longs at the moment, and I will be staying in these dollar longs until we end up, reaching my entry down in these levels, right? So having a good entry like that, lining it with NFP, we started to react again. If we can see price open and then we start to go through, well then perfect. This ended up being just a lower time frame sweep, and dollar can start to go on its way to 102, right? But if not, then maybe we end up getting another sweep to the downside, below levels like this one, and so on and so forth, right? So yeah, that's kind of my idea there for US dollar. I do think that longs are still basically what we want to be playing. It's just about looking in the extreme areas like this one, right? Like when we get below levels like that, to go ahead and just take attempts on it, right? Because, again, we can be wrong about the long-term direction, but we can still win, right? Just like we did here with that push to the upside, and just like we did here with this tiny push to the upside. So it's just about balancing, the potential for just kind of catching those scalps and taking attempts at, when we create new lows to see if that can end up being the bottom. Just take attempts at them, right? And then go ahead, take partials and see if they can continue to run or not, right? There's obviously no way to know how long this is going to take, but it does kind of look like, we are in a bit of an accumulation phase. So the accumulation is happening, I think, to me. I think we're just waiting to really finish that reaccumulation. I do think it's possible that, we end up pushing higher and then getting one more spring. I would love to see that personally. Kind of create more liquidity and then come back down, obviously would be the most ideal. But regardless, guys, I would say stick with the buy mindset, because I think that that's going to be, I think this is going to be the last opportunity we're going to have to really play inside of this range for the, accumulation, right? Because if we're right about this accumulation, we should be able to break 102, break 103, maybe even break 105 even, right? So we want to go ahead and, kind of play the longer term potential. And I think that the longer term potential is in the dollar buys as opposed to the shorts. But we'll see. We'll see how everything plays out in this level. If we start to see key levels break, we might have to reconsider. But at the moment, this is still totally normal for a Wyckoff accumulation to have a sell-off like this. If anything, it's encouraged. Because again, those big sell-offs mean we're probably sweeping, right? So I'm not scared of this push to the downside. I do think that the most likely scenario is that we're just accumulating right now. Right, so the question now being, well, which ones can we take advantage of for that, right? Euro USD to me looks the best, compared to everything else. We're just barely getting sweeps on everything, as we can see. Big candles like that, right, and things like this where we're just kind of barely getting above levels. These are the kind of levels I love to play. And again, it does look like we are distributing, right? We're leaving the buyers in, right, and the sellers are having a tough time to go ahead and, get in and hold into this trade, right? So this up candle to me was really great that happened with NFP, which is why I did end up taking that short there on Euro USD. Hopefully that can just continue. If not, right, again, I do still think that these levels here will hold, like I did say on the last Wyckoff Sundays. So again, I do think that this has some potential, right, to hold there, right? We can see that dollar, when it did take the low, it didn't go quite as far as Euro USD did. Euro USD had quite a nice sweep. We went considerably above that past high. So I would love to see that hold up, but again, like I always say, right? Only time will tell. So we got to go ahead and be patient, wait and see what story the market is telling us and go from there. But I would love to see this. If we do see Euro USD from here hold this high and head down towards 1.15, I think the top might be in, if it does that, right? If we end up just kind of pulling into the imbalance and then making another high, well, then we're going to have to take another attempt later on to see when we can start to target towards 1.15, basically flat. So yeah, that's kind of my idea here for Euro USD. Just again, looking at pullbacks as excuses to short. I'm holding my shorts and seeing what can happen in the new week. And if I do end up heading my entry, then I'll be out of the trade and we'll be looking to take more attempts later on. But I would say, guys, these are the weeks to really be focused. These are the weeks to really, really be focused. Because again, like this week and next week, because I think that some swing opportunities are coming. The kind of swing opportunities that we've gotten previously in the year, in areas like these, areas like that, right? So definitely want to be aware of that. And, again, don't get too caught up in playing against the higher time frame trend, right? That's kind of where I'm at right now. So again, now we'll move on to the next one, GU. I think GU will probably hold this distribution high and then eventually end up reacting down. So I think that this pullback that we've been having is an opportunity, right? Whether we end up holding this level or taking one high, remains yet to be seen. But I do think that this level here has a high likelihood of holding to bring us down to the downside there on GU. AU as well, right? Yeah, again, a lot of these look good, right? They're in good areas, right, to look for. So there's AU, right? GU we have as well. USD Chef. What I would love to see would be for all this liquidity here to break, right? If we do end up getting the sweep, like I said, if we get a deep pullback on dollar, I think USD CHF is going to be the best one to use. Like if we come down to here, then USD CHF will be the one to use as opposed to GU or EU. This is going to be the one that's going to make the most sense. So I would say right now, if you're looking for order flow type of plays, EU and GU are the best ones, right? But if you're looking for, like price to sweep again, then USD Chef I think is going to be the one that you're going to look for. So obviously it's just about reacting to the market, right? Trying to play either way because again, there's no real way to know exactly how the market's going to play out, right? Are we going to get one more sweep? Are we going to hold the current low? There's no way to know that, right? So it's just about taking attempts, using proper risk management, playing in high probability areas that are extreme areas. Because again, those are the type of areas where even if you're wrong about the long-term direction, you can still make money on those short-term moves that happen from those extreme areas, right? So just really that's the way we want to be playing this potential low that's happening on dollar, right? UJ also kind of shaping up for potential longs as well. So we'll see. We'll see how this all goes. But yeah, best trades, I think, best ideas right now are EU, GU, and UChef for that. All right. Let's move into metals, right? So right now, like I said on Wyckoff Sundays last week, the Bulls obviously ended up winning that, right? And that was kind of what we anticipated based off of the price action in the bottom, right? But now we're going to need to see new price action, right? So if we don't get, the bearish side to show up, don't just short just because we're at a high point. Don't just short because we're in imbalance or whatever other reason, right? Short because the current price action is telling you that there's weakness, right? So right now, the current price action is not saying that, right? We are just booming, right? We want to see some breaks in order flow, right? Like get us below levels like that one that are creating new highs. And then from there, start to try and take retests to bring us lower. All right. So yeah, no real reason to short here. No real reason to buy either until we start to pull back or anything like that, right? So right now, I think it's a wait and see approach with gold and silver once again, right? Because even with silver, I mean, I would just love to see silver hit that $50 level down here, right? Before we go up. I mean, we've been holding this level here, consolidating, so why not just have one more spring? Maybe this can be an STM phase B, UT, and then we have a spring, right? But once again, guys, only time will tell. So definitely be cautious, obviously, approaching the metals, right? And I think that's kind of the idea. So it's more of a wait and see approach for me this week. All right. So that's gold, silver. We'll go to the indices, guys. I mean, same idea, really. We got deeper levels that would be best. Right now, we're at a very high point, right? So it's not really the area to buy, but it does look bullish now, guys, right? After kind of having this huge buy up at the bottom, having that accumulation, I say pullbacks are excuses to go ahead and long this back up. So I would love to see price pull back to here, hold that point of order flow, right? I think we have, what is it, 4 hour? Yeah, we have 4 hour down candles here and here, right? Whoops, we have on the daily, it doesn't look like there's anything there. But yeah, that's the idea there with Nasdaq, right? Same thing with US 30, right? Zones lower are better to use, and then same thing with S&P. So only time will tell where we get into, guys. I keep saying it, but again, we have to react to the market and see what it gives us. Right now, we're just way too high to try and take a buy from these levels, right? We're way too high up there, so it doesn't really make sense for us to, try and use that, right? All right, cool. So that's S&P, Nas, US 30. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and go into crypto. All right, so for crypto, right, like I said, I do think that these points here are all liquidity from here, 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 and there. So seeing one more push to the upside, I think is probably best on BTC. Whether we end up getting reactions up there remains yet to be seen, right? Because again, we did kind of say we wanted to target 61, get BTC down towards here. But the fact that we again like came back into previous points of order flow, which is like here, right? We swept. Like look at all these sweeps that happen in those lows. It does give it that accumulation look, right? So because it does look like it has some potential to be an accumulation down here, and then we had the buy, like we definitely just want to be, careful, right? But and just play in extreme areas like this one. I do still think it's worth it to take an attempt in there if we get the right price action, up here that we like, right? And then maybe from there, after taking the highs at 65, 700, we can short. All right, guys, but only time will tell here. But if we start to break through 67.3, that's going to be the cutoff point, and we go from there. Steve said, can you please have a look at oil? I'm thinking it will pull back into the market gap and then back up. Let's take a look. So yeah, oil for me, I do love to see as a, long, obviously with everything going on in the world. It does look like we tapped into a pretty good area here, didn't we? We have an area like this one here, right? I think that this might be the gap that you're speaking of. So we have this gap from here to here. It did get tapped into, but a lot of the times we do see these revisit. So yeah, I would actually really like to see that. Oh, it does look like there's an open gap here. So yeah, I would really like to see areas like this get hit. I think that what your instincts here are spot on. I do think that that looks like the most likely scenario, especially given the fact that these lows here are so close together. They're very they're very much like relatively equal lows, almost like a trend line staying up. So there's going to be liquidity here, right? So seeing a sweep through this level for oil, right? Again, even tapping into that, imbalance would be best, right? With this gap. But, obviously tough to say, but I do think that at least below here is going to happen. And then from there, I would be very comfortable looking for longs here for the long term. I think that we'll probably take all these highs, right? 93 will get taken, right? 97, maybe even all the way up to the highs over here. Who knows? Right? Tough to say. But yeah, that's the idea here with oil. So hopefully, we can't get that, right? But one thing's for sure, like the gap would be best. But one thing's for sure, this level here is definitely going to get taken. So just be aware, right? Set an alert below 74.23 because that's where we're going to start to get into our buy area there right now. So you said same idea. Thanks. Yeah, no worries. Good to hear you have the same eyes for what we're thinking on oil. But yeah, I am still looking for the longs here, guys. We filled this gap very perfectly, so this looks like it could be a bottom. So now we're kind of looking to see, okay, when is this mitigation going to end? So we can long again. All right, guys. So cool. That's really everything that we went through today. So I think that we're good to go ahead and hop off. Appreciate you guys being on the call live. And for those of you guys that are on the YouTube, definitely subscribe, like, comment, and I'll see you guys on the next session. All right, guys. Much love, much appreciation. Peace out. Deuces. Bye-bye.